Okay, thanks, Aaron. We're ready to go.
Go ahead.
I'm going to cover quite a bit of information tonight. I will give you a website a little ways through that has most, if not all, of these slides. And then, as Aaron indicated, this will also be recorded and put on our beef website. Well, I'm here at North Platte, warm day, almost 80 degrees, the West Central Research and Extension Center. Of course, we have other locations where we have beef cattle presence throughout the state and specialists at several of the locations outside of Lincoln. We did, if you haven't met him, we have hired a new nutritionist last September, name of Travis Mullenix. So if you're in need of any nutritional advice services, I can get you his number. He's easy to find. So the Goodmanson Sandhills Laboratory is our largest resource, about 700 breeding females in the Sandhills of Nebraska. Some of the work I'll talk about tonight comes from here, other from down here at North Platte, where we maintain or buy heifers every year and breed heifer calves and then calve them. But a beautiful place in the Sandhills. I'm sure it's a beautiful day. We do a lot of work in the beef systems area, looking at management practices that affect producers' profitability, but also to understand how they impact the entire system. And I think if we look or take a systems approach to beef production, we get pretty overwhelmed in what's important. And currently, there's a lot of buzz going on about efficiency. And efficiency is important, obviously, because the biggest cost is feed for any phase of the beef industry. But even our genetic friends will agree, if we look at the bottom part of this slide, they will agree how important and overwhelming reproduction is to the efficiency of a beef system. By simply increasing number of progeny per dam through either selection, heterosis from crossing, or better management will increase efficiency of production. So reproduction is the most important factor, obviously, for profitable beef production, but not only just breeding season pregnancy rate, but when animals conceive in the breeding season. This is some data from our steer calves from Goodmanson that are finished here at North Platte, looking at the importance of when they were born and how it impacted weaning weights, carcass weights, marbling scores, and overall profitability. And in the heifer calves, those born early are heavier at weaning, heavier pre-breeding, more cycling prior to breeding. They have greater pregnancy rate, more calf in the first 21 days. They wean a heavier calf and they breed back sooner. And I arguably, if you don't know much else about female that you're deciding or contemplating keeping, I think this is a pretty powerful tool to keep those that are born early out of moderate type females. They may be bigger at weaning, but if it's because they're bigger because of age, I do not believe it's a wise decision to call. So as synopsis, we have greater weaning, carcass weights, marbling scores, higher average choice or greater carcass value. The heifers also benefit with higher weaning weights, pre-breeding, pre-calving weights, more cycling, higher preg rates, and more calve early in the breeding season. And those that calve early, as this slide illustrates, their chance that they're going to be open the next year is much less than if they calve later in your calving season. And Harlan Hughes, who many of you have had the honor or opportunity to meet over the years, an economist from NDSU, said it takes a profit from 2 early calving cows to cover the loss from 1 late calver, and a cow that calves in her first 21 days, her entire life will produce you essentially 2 more calves. And I think some work out of Mark kind of reaffirmed that with Bob Cushman demonstrating that these were heifers and they just looked at their first conception date. And those heifers that conceived early in the first 21 days of the breeding season had greater longevity and essentially weaned you another calf by the time they had their 6th calf. So a pretty powerful thing coupled with age. I think a good management practice is to expose more females than you need for replacements and keep only the ones that conceive early. This is some Colorado State data that basically just shows the same thing, but they kind of spin it on an advantage of AI. I would argue, so essentially they wean you 2 more calves in their lifetime if they were out of an AI female, but I would argue a lot of that is a function of synchronization. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on synchronization tonight. I think we make it too complicated. These are probably the only protocols we really need. For a heifer, I prefer the longer term progestin protocols, either of the bottom 2, either MGA, prostaglandin, or 14-day cedar. And we did a large study, being a beef report or it is published in a journal, but comparing those two on about 1,400 heifers, time breeding, they were spot on identical. The key with MGA, obviously, is they have to consume it every day. Now, for anything that's had a calf, there's no compelling data that there's anything better than the 7-day co-sync cedar. Now, that's the heifer protocol, so the timing on the cow protocol is later. For time breeding, it's 60 to 66 hours. The 7-day is just going to be 10 to 15% back in a heifer compared to those bottom 2. Now, right there is the website you can go to find these slides. And you go to resources to the Manhattan, Kansas meeting last year. So the other thing I would point out, and we'll talk a little bit about estrus detection, but we've done some pretty big studies showing really no advantage in estrus detection over time breeding. In about 1,000 heifers, it's in the Beef Report 2017. We looked at a modified estrus detect system versus a timed AI, and they were within 1%. I think we miss out a lot when we think about synchronization, that we can use this effectively with natural service. And there's a simple protocol right there that we've used for years at the ranch, and we do it every year. We turn the bulls in, 5 days later, everything gets a shot of prostaglandin. And that's a pretty short breeding season, 32 days at Fort Keogh. We saw in 3 calving herds greater than 85% preg rate. Those calves are heavier, largely because they're older. We shortened our breeding season 15 days in 1 year, and the gold bar is with synchronization, and you see there's no difference in a shortened breeding season. And we increased profitability in those dollars. It's greater today, but $35 a head. Getting these questions: what product should I use? Not the bottom one for sure, because estrogens are illegal and are not more effective than anything we have that's legal. So estrogens are used to cause ovulation. They require another trip through the chute. There's no evidence, at least in Boss Taurus cattle, that they're any better. Sometimes we think things we don't have access to are somehow going to be better. But there's the prostaglandins you have to choose from. We did a comparison of the Lutelyse Hycon, which was the first sub-Q approved prostaglandin, versus Lutelyse 5 mil. It's in a Beef Report. It's probably 2018. No difference, and there's no reason to believe that. So Estromate is not the same compound as Lutelyse. It's a 2 mil. Cincture is a new one of Marielle's, or DI now, I guess. There's been reviews we've asked Jim Lauderdale to do in some of our repro conferences, and there's no evidence that any of the products are any different. Now, progestins, we either have the oral MGA or the cedar. MGA is not approved in cows. Cedar is a more effective progestin at jump starting cows if they're not cycling anyway. And I don't know that many people have a 33-day window to implement a synchronization program in a postpartum female. And then the GnRH products that we use concurrently with putting in the seeder or when we time breed, again, no reason to think that there's any difference in efficacy.
Rick, before you go on, maybe back up a slide, talk about, I had a question come in, why can't you just give Ludolice at the time you put the bowl in while you wait 5 days? Yep.
You can, and that's better than nothing, but you're going to miss about 25%. Okay, so if you put the bowl in, there's going to be a percent that won't respond to that prostaglandin because they just cycled, right? So if they have a less than 5-6 day old CL, they're not going to respond to prostaglandin, which means it'll be another 19 days in heifers or 21 days in cows before they cycle. Now, if you put the bulls in and breed anything that comes in heat, that'll push those that didn't have a CL to an older CL that should be responsive to prostaglandin. Makes sense?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. So it's the old one-shot, heat check for 5 days, 7 days, and give prostaglandin. And you can do some modified things with that protocol. You can put Estrotec patches on them, and anything that's rubbed off, don't give a shot to and just leave with the bulls. Or the ones you give a shot to, I got big ranches that ride heats on them and pull them in AI on those. So we get this question, and I'm not going to go into this in great detail. It's in a beef report 2016. I was told by someone in Nebraska that you need just as many bulls if you AI as if you don't. And so what's the advantage of AI? And well, I asked Hazy Nielsen, who was a former student of mine, to do a review of the literature. And there's a lot of animals. And if you go down to the bottom, at half the normal bull to cow ratio with AI is every bit as good as having the normal amount you would have without AI. So I would argue you do not need the same number of bulls. And there's a misconception, just like we time breed, some people say, well, they're all going to calve in the same day. Well, no, they're not. So here's the calving distribution of cows that were conceived on the same day, time bred. The most they had was 15%. So that's the same reason you're not going to need that increased bull power, because they're not all going to come back in heat on the same day. So some advantages of synchronization: we can jumpstart some cows. We'll talk more about that. We can increase pregnancy rates, more opportunities to conceive in a short period, and the early average conception date and calving date, and heavier calves, and the advantages of those males and females being older that we went over. So I mentioned, okay. Again, Harlan Hughes said opportunities to increase profits lie in moving females from later calving up, and gives some goals, which I don't think are good enough. But looking at, can you move these cows that aren't cycling up? These are first calf heifers from Missouri in 4 different studies, and about half of them were cycling and half of them weren't. And so we synchronized, time bred them, which had the higher preg rate. They were identical. So we can get anestrus animals pregnant just as well as cycling animals. How can that be? So there's a pretty powerful tool. I've got ranches that routinely will put these in. They're later calving cows. The label says they need to be 20 days postpartum. I've got ranchers sending me calving records that they're moving these late calvers up 1 to 2 cycles. The most I've ever moved one up is 56 days. So is it worth your time before your bull turnout to gather these late calvers up, put a seeder in them, wait a week, give prostaglandin, turn them with the bulls? And you need to give prostaglandin when you pull that seeder, but you don't need GnRH up front in a natural service breeding. So we know our success depends on a lot if we're heat checking on how good we are, right, at heat checking, because it's all multiplied by percentages. And when you start multiplying percentages, the numbers drop pretty quickly. So if we have pretty darn good detection rate, and that's pretty good conception rate, our preg rates are pretty good. But if any of those things fall off, they drop pretty dramatically. So I think that too is why some of our time breeding protocols, and also having more precise understanding of estrus timing, has helped us develop protocols that we can time breed and get just as many pregnant. And then if we look at, well, we just need a longer breeding season. Well, this is what we're going to talk a lot about tonight. Up to a point, your breeding season matters, and it's something less than 70 days. It's probably something less. I mean, routinely at Goodmanson, we have a 45-day breeding season, and in our heifers and cows, at least in our March herd, we're in the mid-90s. So leaving the bulls in longer going to help any? There's something else that is limiting or capping overall pregnancy rates, and that's really what I want to talk about. Some of those animals might not be cycling. We get in this debate. Our May herd tends or has been lower preg rates in our higher risk females, the heifer calves and first calf heifers. And the first thing comes up, well, it's hot during the breeding season. Well, it might be, but it cools off at night. I do not believe heat, at least in this area, is a limitation of cycling activity in cows, because our mature cows breed fine. We can breed, we've done studies where they calve in March, June, or August, and preg rates, or we can get a cow bred anytime. So heat, I do not believe, is a factor unless somehow the younger females are differentially affected. It has to do with declining forage quality. These heifers not being pubertal, I don't know that that's a problem anymore. We got heifer calves come in. I got producers say, I can't leave my bulls out longer than 60 days. I start getting calves bred. Nutrition is probably the biggest issue. Suckling animals, a negative energy balance coupled with nutrition, reproductive diseases, I think it'd be pretty minimal. So how do you identify if these animals are in estrus? You know, I don't know. We've disproven a lot of the age and weight deal on heifers. We can get some 50% mature weight heifers bred pretty easily. How far postpartum does it affect cycling, especially in young females, body condition, and just go observe how many should be in heat on a given day. Should be what, 5%, right? So here's the big limitation. Fertilization rate in most mammals is really high. It's been estimated to be upwards of 90%, but we lose 30% of the embryos before day 40. And it's disheartening because of the amount of research that's been done to try to get at this, because of the huge economic implications to the industry. But those are the four main categories. These animals, a lot of the genetic defects we're never going to find because they result in early embryonic loss. The environmental things, when we handle cattle after breeding, some of those things we'll talk about. Nutrition, I mentioned, that's a big one. Some other things that aren't today a problem, but if we keep increasing milk production in these cows, progesterone and supplementation may be necessary, as they've proven in dairy cattle that it improves reproduction. So why do we see this kind of variation? If we do studies across multiple states in the same protocols, there's all over the board, aren't there? So there's got to be a lot of management things that influence pregnancy. I just want to run through this current heifer study. We had heifers either on corn stalks or in a dry lot, you know, gaining different. Pregnancy rate was higher in those lighter heifers. Why is that? And let's go to a better visual. Heifers on stalks gaining less than a pound a day. In a dry lot, we weren't pushing them hard, 1.5 pounds a day. But those heifers that were on stalks post-breeding in the same pasture outgained the heifers in the dry lot by a full pound a day. So I think this is a very I shouldn't say unappreciated, but unrecognized time, people generally manage from some point prior to breeding and then may forget about them or put them in an environment. They think they're doing a big favor by having these heifers gain 2.5 pounds a day up to breeding and then kick them to grass. Well, they're not going to gain that. So part of that lower gain in the stock heifers, there is a compensatory gain effect, but 1.5 pounds, I wouldn't expect a huge decline. They're just going to continue to gain, or they should gain better than that on grass in most years. But there's also this behavioral component that's really hard to quantify. But we have done studies demonstrating that heifer calves produced in the environment, such as corn stalks, when they're being developed, actually perform better as a bred heifer. So a lot of the work established some magical target weight of 65% of mature weight to get cattle bred, and which we know we don't need, and then focused on how you get there. Clanton was here, saw no differences in age of puberty, conception rate, or calf performance. I'd point out the red and blue lines. The blue line going from a low gain, moving up into breeding. They did it with less feed. They had greater first service conception rate. It appeared that actually flushed those animals, moving from a lower level of nutrition up, and they had more conceive early, and they had more in the herd at 5 years of age that were developed on a ration that was probably similar to something they were going to see as a older cow. And there is learned behavior, and I think we all know it. It's just hard to identify. This is some cattle in southwest Nebraska where they leave these calves on the cow till they come off stalks. Mentioned our May herd. Our younger females don't breed as well. Here's a comparison of the March and May heifers. Interestingly, though, and I need to I don't know what's happening, but the last 2 years they have been pretty equal. In the previous studies, all of our replacements in our later calving herds came out of the March herd, and they weren't heifer calves. I don't know, and Travis and I are mulling this around, discussing it. Is there some adaptability over time where these animals coming from this herd, the ones that survive, are somehow, and he's very interested in nutrient utilization and elasticity and some of the identifying animals that can live in a harsh environment, I guess. Are they adapting over time? Well, I don't know what changed these last 2 years, but they've been pretty spot on identical. But the first several years, they were this. I think this is just caution of getting heifers too fat. These were either 7 or 5s. They restricted till they quit cycling. Those fat heifers had to get a full condition score greater to cycle again. So can we program animals to be dependent on a certain amount of body fat to ever breed by how we develop them? And there's hormones secreted from fat cells that would indicate such. Here's our good friend John Patterson, nutritionist in Montana State, telling us that balance is the key. And we tend to, I've already got many cases this year. Got these cattle all confirmed pregnant last fall. Now there's 20% of them open. They were bred, and then we moved them, and we've lost a bunch of them. What's happening? So we look at all these things, and this is a suspect. We think this is a really good environment to breed on. There's some older data that shows too much protein when there's not enough energy can have a negative effect on reproduction. Patrick Gunn, who was at Iowa State, if you're interested in more detail on this, has summarized a lot of the beef data from the Des Moines proceedings at that same website, and concluded that in beef cattle, it's unlikely that excess protein is a big problem as it is in dairy. I do know this ranch moved from South Dakota to Nebraska, and they kept the grass lush. They fertilized the heck out of it. It was irrigated grass, and they absolutely had a disaster on their AI preg rates. And we got them to do more what you see on the screen. Let it mature, protein goes down, don't fertilize, feed some supplemental feed. It turned it around in 1 year. Was it that? I can't be sure. A lot of work on fat supplementation from Miles City when I was there. Fat is not a miracle cure-all. All of those fat sources have different fatty acid profiles, and the positive and or negative effect on reproduction, it has to do with what those fatty acid profiles are. I don't think we should, if anybody's interested, I've written a review paper on the effects of fat supplementation on reproduction in beef cattle. So I would buy the supplement you need for the primarily protein, which corrects the energy imbalance that we're trying to do when we're feeding poor quality forages. Micronutrients, it's all over the board, right? Trace minerals are important. If we have not only their presence, but the presence of antagonists such as molybdenum and iron, for example. Sulfur can tie up some important ones like copper and zinc. So those need to be balanced, and we need to know point sources of the antagonists as well. If I'm going to feed a supplement, I recommend to put an ionophore in, Rumensin, Bovatec, as they're labeled, independent of their other benefits on energy utilization and nutrient utilization. There's some indication of positive effects on reproduction. So really a balance, all these things, and also it include point sources of potential antagonists in the water, but obviously protein energy from a nutrient amount standpoint is the most important, but oftentimes we need to supplement protein to utilize the energy that is in a poor quality forage to increase digestibility. Sometimes we're learning that we maybe even need to be looking back farther than the last breeding season to start to understand why we have differences in pregnancy rates of potential future females. And this evolved from some work where we looked at, do you need to supplement cows on winter range? And from a pregnancy standpoint, no. There's 14 years of data shows no benefit of supplementing cows grazing winter grass. They get, probably thinner than we like at calving, but look what they're doing in that for March calving, June breeding season, they're moving up dramatically into breeding. If they weren't doing that, I think we'd see a total different response. But we've seen those females that come from non-supplemented cows are actually less fertile. And the steer calves have lighter carcass weights, less marbling, lower quality grade. So we're impacting these animals before they're ever born. So this nutrient restriction isn't affecting the cow, but it's affecting the fetus, both male and female, later in life. So how cattle are managed during gestation can also be something to consider for why, a lot of people go out and buy heifer calves and they have no idea on source. First thing you ask, well, were they implanted? Well, I don't know. What was the management program on the cow herd? Well, I don't know. I know some feedlots that are darn sure finding out because they're going back and finding out these poorly managed herds, these cattle fall apart in the feedlot. So just a few other things as we're going into breeding season. We think of sires. When I did this study, it was one of the first ones I completed here in Nebraska. I called up my AI company rep and I said, what's this superstar bee bull I got here? And he says, read the cane code. And I read it and he said, that's a custom collect bull. And I will not and cannot say, because I've used a lot of custom collect semen, that all of it's bad, but it does not go through the rigors that these AI company semen does. So here's a lot of numbers. This is from Mike Smith, I believe. From 4 of the major AI companies, 61% timed AI, I believe. 31 sires, 3 were below 50%, only 3. Now, if we look at custom collect, they were averaged 49%, but 7 were below 50. So just taking your herd sire in one day and jumping them and freezing the semen is not the same as what these AI stud bulls go through. Technicians, we go through a steep learning curve. As they become better, we always keep track of technicians in our breeding projects, and experienced technicians are within 1-2%, but new people sometimes are lower. And where you put it, if you do a cervical deposit, and they say it occurs in 20% inseminations, as 10% lower conception rate. No advantage of depositing in the horns at all. We get this, we got a storm coming in, cattle are all supposed to be cycling in heat. What do I do? Well, fixed time and breed at scheduled time. That solves all your questions on timing. But if you're heat detecting, you know, breed them according to heat and then clean up time AI, or breed the ones in estrus and then 9 to 11 days later give prostaglandin, switch to fixed timed AI. So this one's got a lot of press of the South Dakota data, and I'm not an expert in this area. I've talked to Dale Grotolution about it. I've talked to some industry reps about it. We know if we vaccinate naive animals too close to breeding, it's going to be a wreck because you get swelling of the ovary. The challenge has become lately that they're drawing inferences that modified live itself, even in vaccinated cattle, is somewhat less. But I mean, look at where you're at today and what your vet recommendations. We're using modified live and we're in the, you know, mid 90s. I just, replacement heifers should be vaccinated before and at weaning, both heifers and cows, 30 days before breeding. Follow the label, work with your vet. Animals that have not previously been vaccinated, we know, should not receive pre-breeding vaccinations when you put CEDARs in cows, for example. I will refer you to Des Moines Proceedings of Russ Daly. The South Dakota data is there. And you read that paper, it is back and forth, back and forth. There's a lot of statements that these cattle were not challenged. And in face of a real challenge, I've been told modified live is much more, you know, effective. But I guess observe what your current pregnancy data or results have been. I think a lot of people use modified live, and I don't know that it's an issue given at the right time, and it's usually a problem just in naive animals. Facilities sure make the world a great place when we're AI, and if we have something that we can breed a lot of animals and move cattle through freely. Because we know stress, but you know, how can you stress an animal much more than when they're cycling, and a lot of them are riding and stuff. But it does lead into the question, so when do I transport animals after AI? So just as that single shot prostaglandin doesn't abort animals that were bred in those first 5 days, transporting them then will not either. But after they have a CL, if you stress them, transport, preg them too early, whatever, severe, big changes in something, you'll have some loss. And when are they safe? Probably not till something after 45 days. So either right away or wait 45 days. So
Rick, before you go
yeah.
on, I had a question come in on modified live. How much time should be given between modified live and breeding?
So I think that one slide had it, I believe, and follow the label, but I believe, at least on that slide, and this is from Mike Smith, both heifers and cows should be vaccinated at least 30 days before breeding.
Okay, thank you.
But again, follow the label, work with your vet. This is out of my area, but it's something that's gotten a lot of press because of range cow and because of some of the stuff that were published from it. So here's an area we often avoid. And I spoke in Fort Worth at the American Angus Association and showed this slide. And we wonder why our preg rates aren't what they used to be, or they haven't improved, or I guess what's changed in your cattle. And cattle have changed. Every breed association shows some linear increases in production variables, such as, and I'll show you here in a minute, you know, these aren't the same as they were 15 years ago. And if we're going to make genetic change in a herd, we're going to do it through sire selection, not through any one female in the herd. So I think those functional traits, when did she get pregnant? How old is she? Those types of things. Is she out of a cow that calves early every year? That's a more powerful tool in keeping replacement heifers than a lot of feedlot or production half sib data. So do you keep replacement heifers? How and when do you sell your calves? So what animals are you breeding towards? There's a lot of terminal calving ease bulls that aren't being used that way. You understand? They're calving ease, but they're really high dollar beef. My genetic friends tell me those are terminal. We should not be keeping females out of them. So we need to understand what these indexes are and how they're influencing your production traits, which are going to ultimately affect reproduction. So I wish we had tools that we could identify fertility components. When will this heifer conceive? But we don't, and likely never will. There's probably thousands of genes involved in reproduction to produce a live calf. So we use associated traits. I think that paper somewhere, we talk about 3 things in genetic selection that have the biggest impact on reproduction. And one's dystocia. That's why we breed calvinies. Those animals that don't have calving difficulty breed back sooner. And when we assist, if they need it, increases when they breed back. Scrotal, I think we run into a point where this is a threshold trait, that we're getting heifer calves bred on the cow because they're reaching puberty too soon. So I think every trait we have should have some type of a reasonable threshold, and we understand that adding another unit isn't necessarily going to be beneficial. And here's what we've done to scrotal, and that's not even updated. It's 12 years back, and I bet it's still climbing. And here's the second one. Okay, calvinies, milk, too much milk in a limited resource environment, something's got to give unless we change resources, right? And I've had people tell me they don't believe in EPDs because my weaning weights haven't changed in 15 years. So, well, are we still running 40 cows on a section today and we ran 40 cows in the section 15 years ago? Them aren't the same 40 cows. Here's the third one. Mature sizes, our cattle get bigger and we don't change nutrient resources, something's going to give. And is it in fact reproduction? So here's that slide. Here's the major 7 breeds. And the genetic trend for yearling weight is going up, right? And we see that black line in the middle, that moderate maternal type animal back in the 80s, whenever. This is caught up. So the last mark data said all the major 7 breeds have converged upon yearling weight. So there is that selection, obviously. So just a few more slides. A friend of mine put this together. He said if a producer was using Angus bulls with average EPD for milk, weaning, and yearling weight from 98 to 2000, the same bulls would be ranked in the bottom 5% for these traits today. And Jim McGran, who's an economist, well, retired, but Texas, said the reproductive rate of the cow herd has not increased in the past 20 years and has tended to decline in the past 10 years. Larry Cora, who was with CAB, was with K-State for a number of years as beef specialist, said, thus, as we strive to improve growth rate in the cattle industry and to make the commercial cow more efficient from the standpoint of utilizing nutrients, we must ensure that we do not deviate from the goal of maintaining an optimum level of reproductive efficiency. And this is one of the most powerful tools I know of, is having a hybrid, crossbred, whatever you want to call her, female that has been shown that her profit per cow exposed has, in 1 year, is worth $100 more, and it's largely due to longevity, weaning more calf weight per cow exposed. So we covered a lot of things here today. We got to give the right shots at the right time. If you're going to be AIing, go to that Repro website and download the Sync Planner and print you out the calendar so you don't mess things up. So what are some things to consider? And we covered all these. Cattle are not good candidates. What aren't good candidates? Some people tell people they got to be, 50, 60 days postpartum. Well, those aren't the ones that are going to benefit the most from the cedar. They need to be at least 20 or 30 optimally. But some of these high-risk females, these first calvers, I got guys that won't breed first calvers because they say they don't get pregnant. Well, you're probably not using a progestin in them. Protocol compliance, sire selection. Over time, this is something we can't ignore. There's some good stuff on the Des Moines meeting, Brad Stroud on semen handling, I'd refer you to. All these talks are recorded, slides posted, proceedings paper, including mine at Manhattan that covers all this. Facilities, when we stress animals, do cattle lose weight post-breeding? That is one that I think is more of a problem than we know. Unlikely it's the activity of the compounds we use. Focus on a high percent pregnant early. Starts with our heifer, and when she conceives the first time, I would, if you're breeding heifers and you're not AIing, I would synchronize them. I got guys that say once these females are set up, they're set up for life, and that's kind of what Cushman's data said. We get them bred early, they stay bred early. So consider synchronization even with natural service. Do we need to intervene? These make calvers, they need something more than they're getting grazing native sandhill range, or the preg rates are off. At least we're initially. And it's primarily the high-risk females, but I don't consider a heifer calf high risk. But it turned out, at least in the first few years, they did not breed up with what the Marches did. But currently they are, so I don't know what's going on. Herd health and when we give shots, all those things. And genetics that fit the environment might not be today, but it might be some of the answer for what's gone or going on over time. And this lost art of heterosis, crossbreeding, hybrid vigor. The number one benefit is in reproduction. A lot of what's in my paper from Manhattan came from Mike Smith's paper from Joplin, but mine was updated with some other things. But you might go back to this paper as well as the proceedings to review before the breeding season. And all these things apply not only to AI protocols, but natural service and what we're doing with cattle when, and a lot of the management things are applicable to both. Aaron said this will be on our beef website. A lot of really good information. Go back through the last 3-4 years of beef reports for some of the published data on sync heat detection, on split time AI, on synchronization comparative products. That's all on there. The beefrepro.info would have additionally a lot of other information from other sources as well, from other universities, and my contact information. And that these slides, again, most all of them are going to be on that beefrepro.info website under the Manhattan, Kansas session, or in the first session of that meeting.
So Rick, one of the questions that came in is, as we think about production in cattle from a cow-calf perspective, what should be a target as we think about production? Are we looking at wean weight, or are we looking at number of calves weaned? What's some parameters to think about in terms of reproduction?
My students one time said we look at pounds of calf weaned per cow exposed, which probably isn't a very good metric. It maybe should be pounds of calf weaned per pound of cow exposed, but we don't know cow weights. Some things I like to look at are the percent of calves born in the first cycle, weaning weights to a point, depending on your marketing options, but I think we're gonna and are getting in trouble. Travis Mullenix has some pretty neat data. Admittedly, it's not in Nebraska, but in Tennessee, showing cows with extremely different levels of milk production, weaning similar weight calves, but their preg rates, as expected, are linearly declined as milk goes up. So that's counterintuitive to what a lot of people think, but there's some older data showing that a calf will reach its genetic potential some way. And the theory is that if the milk isn't there, they probably graze more. But it's not the strain on the cow that affects reproduction. I don't know, Aaron, you do a lot of that benchmarking and unit cost of production. What's your metric?
I like to look at realized reproductive rate. So what's the percent calves weaned per cow exposed? That is a pretty big deal, and I'd sure like to see that in the mid to upper 80s. If you're less than that, I think you need to take a look at what's taking place and why. So a couple other questions that came in, Rick. One was looking at nutritional supplements. If we got cows turned out on immature grass, plain nutrition, do they need something else like a lick tub, or is that adequate?
Immature grass?
Yeah.
Oh, it scares the heck out of me. Every night I drive home by this cows on pivots of rye, and there ain't no rye. I think they still need some forage. I mean, I can't imagine they're coming close to meeting. They're going to have to eat, what, 70 pounds of that to get close to their, because it's 80% water and there's none there. That scares me. People putting these cows out, and that cover crop isn't there. I don't know what the implications are before breeding. That there's yearlings out on this stuff. They can't be doing much. They got to be just looser and loose. Putting more protein in isn't the answer, though. I mean, there's a lot of non-protein nitrogen in that. Some grass hay, to my mind, maybe one of the best things a guy could do. But
right. So another question is, someone asked that they typically only put their early calvers on a timed AI seed or sync program, but based on the data that you showed tonight, you really feel like really all of them, as long as they're 20 days postpartum, could go on that. Is that correct?
Yeah. And success might be somewhat lower, admittedly, but is it worth it? I think so. And even if they don't breed AI, they're likely that they'll move up and breed the next cycle.
So another question that came in, Rick, is there's some data, I don't know if data is the right word, there's some thoughts out there, there's certainly differences among bulls and in terms of their ability to fertilize cows. What's your thoughts on just the genetic part of that in terms of natural service? And there was some talk I haven't seen recently, but fertility associated antigens and things like that.
So are there markers, or is that the question? Yeah, there's inherent, especially on estrus, there's a lot less variation in fertility in AI sires. We go to time breed, some of them are better than others. And why is that? It probably has to do with sperm longevity. The fertility associated antigen deal you talked about, Roy Axe's deal, was being marketed for a while. It was supposed to be validated at Clay Center. There's a ubiquitin something protein that Peter Satowski's working with in Missouri. I don't know of any assay analysis that will tell us beyond a BSE which bull is better than the other bull. But in a BSE, and I don't not recommend it, but I remember Peter Chenoweth, when he was at K-State at a meeting, said something about a breeding soundness exam only accounts for something less than 15% of a bull's ability to sire calves. There's data out there where they've done parentage showing bulls that pass a BSE. The extreme was one bull sired 70 calves in 50-day breeding season to 5 bulls not siring a calf that passed a BSE. Sadly, there's not a lot of people working on the male side, and I'm not sure we understand a lot of the fertility thing. We know that this fat bull thing isn't working. Go look at one of my former students talk at K-State, and I don't know why do we have to have bulls fat to sell them, but these studs don't like it.
All right. Let me open it up here, and if anybody's on who wants to ask or phone, I'll get it now. So I've got it opened up. So if you're on the phone and want to ask a question, go ahead. Okay. Didn't have any questions in. Had another chat come in. Let's see. So if you have first calf heifers, would you recommend giving a progesterone shot? Which we don't have progesterone shots, but I guess to get them bred sooner. So really, there's two types of progesterone options, either cedar or MGA. So for that question, yep.
And there was an injectable progesterone one time, but I wouldn't. It's illegal, and no, you need a longer exposure than that.
So, had someone ask if you could pull up your slides, Rick, and just show the different AI protocols again in terms of estrus synchrony.
No, I just
close it out.
Just put them away, but I can get them.
All right.
And those protocol sheets are on that beefrepro.info on the front page. So are they? Am I on sharing or no?
Share your screen. And Rick, if you wanted to, you could just pull up that beefrepro.info website.
Yeah. Okay. Unless there's some other slides they're going to want.
Yeah. I currently not seeing your.
Yeah.
Okay.
New share.
Yep. So that would be.
Can you see that?
Yeah, I see you going through your slides right now.
Right there.
Yep. There it is.
So those are the heifer protocols. Now, MJ is not approved in cows, so that's 14-day cedar. You don't have time in cows mostly, and it's not any better than 7-day. But make sure 7-day in cows, the timing is different than that slide. When you time breed is different. Yeah. And the time breeding on MJ and the cedar are different. And the interval from MJ to PG is different than cedar to PG. That's why I recommend you get that sync planner, and because timing is everything. Cattle cycle sooner off the cedar. That's why that interval is different.
So one other question that came in, Rick, that you didn't discuss, how about early weaning of calves or 48-hour calf removal? Is that a tool that should be considered or utilized?
There's some old data at CSU, and one, I think I can't remember without looking it up. One of them, it was detrimental, and I'm not sure if it was primiparis, first calvers, or cows. Almost sync. And then Cliff Lamb has some data. Send me an email or to Cliff, but he has some data showing some negative implications in weaning weights. And I think it was with 48-hour. I don't know that it's worth it, especially where we have the cedar. If you're using cedars, I'd say definitely not, because you're kind of, may not be all the same mechanisms, but it's going to be similar. And that would have to be pretty young to, you know, I guess it would be when you're breeding them. But some of the more recent data, I think, didn't show a benefit and actually showed some implications on weaning weights.
All right. Any other questions from chat? Anything we need to worry about, Rick, in terms of preventing infection on cedar inserting?
Oh, you got to be as, you know, clean as possible. I use 2 buckets. One of them's got disinfectant in it, and wash good in between. And there was some work in dairy cattle. I don't know if it's been repeated or if it's worth it, or if it's a product called Nova Lube that has Nova San. I suppose you could put Nova San in lube. I don't know the concentration, but I don't know, you just got to be as sanitary as possible. I have not ever had an infection in ones I've done, and some have. And the cedar, if you're going to put cedar in heifers, don't lock them up. They fight. I've had some prolapses. That's the worst thing you can do. If you got them locked up, feed them MGA. But they spend a lot of time worrying about that. And there is a low level of prolapse.
Any other questions? All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Rick, again, your contact information, you're at West Central Research and Extension Center, so folks can shoot you an email or give you a phone call if they have questions based off tonight's webinar.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you. For those of you who joined us, appreciate you joining me, and probably will receive an email from me in the next couple days with like some feedback on tonight's program. That'll conclude our program for tonight.